Hello, you beautiful people. Today we are back with some more buy low player options for you guys. So these are guys who I think are currently underperforming where I have them valued at or where I think they'll end up by the end of the season. So I suggest you trade for them because I think you can get them for a very discounted price and I would expect them to bounce up soon. So if there's any you don't agree with or any you think that are going to maintain this level of production, let me know in the comments why you disagree. There's no need to get hostile or get angry at me. Just tell me why you disagree. If you have any other buy low players that you think I forgot to mention, then drop them in the comments. Help everybody out. And on that same note, don't forget to join the Discord, man. Link in the description if you want to talk about anything fantasy basketball related, NBA related, all that good stuff. It's really great community in there. And yeah, I think that about does it. Oh yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to, the classic YouTuber saying. But anyway, let's just get right into it. So if I sound a bit out of breath, my apologies. I just got back from hooping, went a little late. When you say you're going to stop and then, you get a few more games, the next thing you know, you've been there for an hour and a half. It just be like that sometimes. But first player on my list for buy low options is Christian Wood. Now, in my personal leagues, I'm targeting Christian Wood right now actively. He's just been underperforming to such a vast extent that I think it is such a good deal if you can get him right now. Like, you're really not going to give up a lot. He's averaging 31 fantasy points per game at the moment, which is way down from his numbers last season. He was averaging around 38 fantasy points per game. And I think Christian Wood is probably going to finish at the very worst as a top 65 player. So if you can get him for like maybe a top 100 guy, maybe even a guy you picked off waivers in a 2-for-1, two waiver guys for him, I think that's a great deal. He's not shooting the ball well at all. He's averaging like 11 points per game the last 7 days. He's not blocking any shots, and he's like historically a pretty decent shot blocker. His rebounding numbers are still staying around the same, but it's mainly just the field goal percentage is way down. And I know there's the concern with the Rockets, like they're really crappy. They're tanking, obviously, focusing on the young talent, but Wood is still getting around 30 minutes a game. And I would not expect this trend of production to continue. I would be shocked if he finished with anything less than 35 fantasy points per game at the end of the season. So I think it's a really good time to buy low on him. Just be aware, like I'm not expecting him to jump up to like 40 fantasy points per game or nothing on the season. But yeah, I just think it's a good time. Not going to cost you a lot to trade for him. I don't really have any like packages off the top of my head, like specific player packages. If you guys have traded for Christian Wood in your leagues, or any of these guys on the list for that matter, just comment below what you traded for him, just to give people an idea of their market, help them out, maybe help them make a few trades. And yeah, that's going to do it for Christian Wood. I think he's probably the biggest buy low target because everyone that has Christian Wood seems to be panicking with him quite a bit. And I would just suggest that you sort of capitalize on that and send a trade offer to that manager's way. Alright, so the next player on my list there's no secret about him. Everyone is well aware of his struggles right now, and it's going to be Julius Randle. So the last 5 games, he's been averaging way below his average on the season. He's really struggling from the field, and it's just bringing his overall numbers down. And I don't know why people are so quick to forget the entirety of last season just because of 5 games. Like, it boggles my mind how this happens every year. I think Julius Randle is a great buy low candidate right now. He's down to about 37 fantasy points per game because the last 5 games have just been dragging the average down as it is. And yeah, last season he averaged 43.6 fantasy points per game. He plays like more minutes than anybody in the league. Like, he averages around like 35 minutes per game. And he's just someone that I would love to have on my team. If the Randle owner if he's panicking in your league, I would definitely throw a trade his way because I think Randle is going to finish top 20. I still stand by that. I'm pretty confident that this is just a little slow stretch for him, and I would expect him to bounce back. And I know you could probably sell like a common narrative with Randle, and there is some validity to it, but he does take a lot of like tough shots, and like that's the saying, you got to be a tough shot taker to be a tough shot maker, and sometimes the shots just aren't going to fall for him. But he made enough of them last year for me to be confident that this is just a blip on the radar, and I wouldn't be concerned if I had Randle. I would just wait this rough patch out, and I definitely expect him to bounce back, because yeah, there's no way he's going to be averaging like what's he averaged the last 5 games, like 20 something fantasy points per game. Like, I just see no universe in which that keeps up. So yeah, I would definitely offer a trade for Julius Randle right now. I think he's a great buy low candidate. And number one option on the Knicks, the minutes, the rebounding, the scoring, the assist numbers are really good for a power forward. What more do I have to say, man? Julius Randle, profile picture for the channel. I gotta love him. On that note, if any of you guys have any experience like designing like profile pictures or graphic design, anything, hit me up. I got an email in the description looking for someone to make me a profile picture. If any of you guys could help me out with that or know somebody who could, really appreciate that. But anyway, sort of off topic, we'll just go ahead and get into the next player. So third up is a guy that I'm seeing in a lot of trades. He's getting shipped out. Owners are trying to sell him off their teams, and I highly recommend against that. I'm not a big fan of trading him right now because I think he is a great buy low target. And it's going to be Drew Holiday. So Drew Holiday is somebody who I think has been very underrated for fantasy because he missed the start of the season with an injury. But yeah, ever since coming back, he's slowly been working his way into things. His numbers have steadily increased, but I still think you could probably get him for a discounted price. Because on the season, he's averaging 29 fantasy points per game. And if we look at his numbers from last season, he was averaging 40 fantasy points per game. And that's a pretty drastic difference. And I do expect his numbers to sort of revert back closer to that average. Because it's not like the Bucks have drastically changed their roster any. There's still the same amount of shot attempts available for Drew and everything. He really just has to get back into the swing of things. In fact, he's taking the exact same number of shot attempts this season as he was last season. And yeah, so far, once he gets his efficiency up, I'm not really too worried about him. I think he is a top 40 fantasy player. Maybe that might be pushing it because he missed the first few games, but I think like per game basis, I do have him as a top 40 fantasy player. So I would highly recommend trading for him. I think his value is low right now. Like I said, it's just due to the injury, but I don't know why people are shipping him out, it seems, for a discounted price. I've seen a lot of trades in the Discord involving Drew Holiday and 2-for-2s, and he's sort of getting treated as like a throw-in option, as if he's not like a top 40 to top 50 fantasy player. So yeah, he's going to be third on my list, and then we'll just go ahead and get in the next player. So a very similar thing could be said about the next player on my list, and it's actually going to be Terry Rozier. And Terry Rozier is someone that I was pretty high on coming into the season because I wasn't expecting the whole Miles Bridges turning into a Super Saiyan God situation, but even with that, I'm still very high on Terry Rozier going into this season, and I stand by it. His numbers on the season are very down, and it's pretty much the exact same situation as Drew Holiday. He was hurt to start the season, so his numbers are very lackluster as to where they were last season. He had a few shoddy games, like when he just came back from the injury, and that really just hurts the averages when you haven't played a lot of games yet. If you have one stinker, then it's pretty much going to really drag that average down. So right now it's at 26 fantasy points per game, and I would almost bet my house that that's going to get up to around, at the very minimum, 35 fantasy points per game by the end of the season. Because if we look at his numbers last year, what did he finish with? I think he averaged around that last season, if I'm not mistaken. Just give me one sec here. Yeah, he averaged 37 fantasy points per game last year. And his shot attempts aren't as low as you think they were. They're only one shot less than what they were previous season, but it's just the field goal percentage is a bit low. That's definitely going to work its way back up. The assist numbers are slightly down. That's just due to LaMelo running more of the point guard. But they're not drastically different. Terry is more of a score-first player, and I don't think that's really been taken for him. And if we even look at his recent game log, the last two games, he sort of started to pick it up. Had a 20-point game, a 19-point game. Had a 29-point game against the Lakers, and he's capable of having really big nights like this. And some people were even talking about dropping him, which is just mind-boggling to me. He is absolutely must roster in every sort of league. I don't really think it's debatable. I'm not even listening if someone says they're going to drop him. You're definitely new to fantasy, and I would highly advise that you do not do that. Even if you're in an 8-team league, Terry Rozier is must roster to me. I'm not dropping him in any format. And yeah, that's why I think he's a huge buy low, because if people are considering dropping someone that's going to average 35 fantasy points per game, great opportunity to swoop in there. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and get into the next player on my list. Moving on, we got Jerami Grant of the Detroit Pistons, and he's someone whose average really doesn't reflect how good he's been doing this season. And like I mentioned with an earlier player, it's just when you haven't played a lot of games into the season and a player has a shitter of a night, like when they have a single-digit fantasy night, it's really going to disproportionately affect their fantasy average. And that's sort of been the case with Jerami Grant so far. Overall, he's been very solid, averaging probably around upwards of 35 fantasy points per game, but there's been 4 or 5 games where he's had, if we just look at his fantasy log here, he had a 5 fantasy point night, a 9-point night, a 6-point night, and just having anything like that's just going to completely demolish your average. So I think his average points really isn't reflective of his value right now, because overall on the season, I do expect it to definitely even out and sort of level out at around 35 fantasy points per game. So, as is the case with most of these guys, I'm not expecting a huge jump in their fantasy point average per game, but I'm expecting with Jerami Grant at least, right now he's at 29.5. I don't see any way that doesn't get to 35 fantasy points per game. Overall, he's just been really solid, contributing a lot in the scoring category, which is nice to see. Had a 35-point game against Houston the other day, 27-point game against Philadelphia. And yeah, on the season, he's averaging 18 points per game. Very solid option, and I just really think his average is not reflective of his play style, of his average on the season, of what it's going to be. That was a really shitty explanation, but I'm tired, it's late, cut me some slack here, fellas. So yeah, Jerami Grant, great buy low option, getting a lot of shots on the Pistons. Cade Cunningham is definitely starting to creep up, as I sort of predicted that he would earlier in the season, but I do think Jerami Grant is still going to be a very valuable fantasy asset, and I would highly recommend buying low on him. Alright, so then to finish off the video, as someone that I usually avoid the plague in fantasy, because if you're new to the channel, I do not mess with guys with very recent injury history or severe injuries in the very recent past. and it's going to be Karis LeVert. And if it wasn't the case that he's literally averaging as much as like a waiver wire guy in an 8-12, 8-10 team league, then I wouldn't even be considering this. But I really don't think you're going to have to give up a lot to get LeVert. And while I do think he's probably going to miss quite a few games this season, I mean, the dude's averaging 26 fantasy points per game, and I'd be shocked if that doesn't get up to, at the very minimum, 30 fantasy points per game by the time the season's done. So yeah, just be aware with Karis LeVert. Like, I would not give a lot for him. Like I said, there is the injury risk, but just when I think it'll cost you like maybe the price of a good waiver wire pickup or something that doesn't have like an extreme long-term value, I think that's sort of an opportunity that's like, hey, very low risk, high reward situation. If Karis LeVert maybe somehow does stay healthy for the season, proves me wrong, and his fantasy numbers start to increase as his efficiency goes up. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for the video. Hopefully this helped you guys out in terms of players to target for this week. Definitely a lot of buy low options. If you disagree with any, like I mentioned at the start of the video, just let me know in the comments, man. I'm interested to hear your guys' opinions. Like I said, I'm no expert or anything, just giving who I think are good buy low options for the week. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. It's whatever, man. Just my opinion. But yeah, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys very much for watching. As always, I hope you guys all have a very great rest of your day.